Hello and welcome back. This is Class 8, and here we are once again with our ferry comp. And this is with our ferry that has been retimed as we looked at last week. One note to bring up is that if you notice, this ferry comp is not integrating with the background very well and has everything to do with the fact that I forgot to render these out as RGBA. So if you look at the right nodes here, they're all rendered out as RGB and not RGBA. And so if I just go ahead and set these, and you as well, set these to RGBA and re-render these out, then you will be in much better shape. And hopefully you didn't make the same mistake that I did in your retiming of the screen left ferry, which I think I have over here. That being said, let's dive into what is the more exciting stuff. And actually, just to keep this thing from making too much noise, I'm going to hit the read from file checkbox here. So it won't look correct when I do that because it's going to read from the file that was already rendered. And as I get into this, I'm going to stop down at a certain point to render these out so it won't be a problem further on down the line. But most importantly, the thing that we're excited about here is that we are going to do multi-pass compositing with CG. So for these ferries, we actually have the CG wings, and here we are looking at the beauty pass. So let's just go ahead and comp this over our screen right ferry. Oh, and mind you, one thing to note is that the pass here is foreground 1 for the screen right. For the screen left ferry, which I'll let you guys do, it's going to be foreground 2. So just something to note, and I will go ahead and file these in before I package this up and send it out to you. But that foreground 1 goes to the screen right ferry, and subsequently foreground 2 to the screen left ferry. That being said, let's go ahead and comp this over. So we'll add a reformat because this is not the right format, and we will set this to none. Our root size is 2048 by 858, so it's not a 2K plate, but if you noticed our background, that's exactly what that is. So that being said, let's put this over the girl here and just see what this looks like. All right. There we have it, and now as you can see our wings are not lined up, so let's go ahead and line the wings up. And while we do this, let me just break this away, and let's go ahead and grab our anchor point, center it with the wings, and let's put them right over here. So I'd say that actually looks okay. So now that those are set correctly, let's go back here and switch the inputs so the wings actually exist behind her. And that looks pretty good. So now that we have done this, let's just go ahead and talk a little bit about the EXR files that you're being supplied with. So with EXR, in case you aren't aware, it gives you the option to have multiple layer sets. So traditionally with a typical file format, you get 4 channels, which is R, G, B, and A, but nothing else. In EXR, you get these other layers, which are referred to as layer sets. And if you have ever noticed over here, you have a bunch of different options. Well, now that we have this EXR with all these layer sets in them, you will now see this loaded up with all these various layers. So if you have a full-size keyboard and you use the page down and page up, this will cycle you through these various layer sets. So essentially, to quickly just kind of go over what we have here, we have this beauty, which is exactly as the RGB. Then we have this depth pass, and I don't think this is correct. In fact, I'm almost 100% sure it isn't because we're not getting any of the wings, the translucent parts of the wings or anything like that in there. And then moving on, we have our diffuse, which I'm going to go ahead and bring this back to its default gain. And actually, while we're here, I'll go full frame so it's a little easier to see. Then we have another diffuse pass, which is exactly the same. So it's pretty clear that Maybe this went through a few iterations and was rendered a few different times, possibly by different artists, and they created new output sets from Maya and didn't realize that there was one already made for them. And mind you, I just want to let you know that this was all rendered out with Mental Ray, and that is the default renderer with Maya. So the math that we're going to be using in this case is actually going to be applicable pretty much only to Mental Ray. With V-Ray and RenderMan, they have different ways of combining their passes and separating them out. So what you see and learn here will be only applicable to Mental Ray. Now, let's just continue down. So this here is, well, it's called the direct, what I would say is direct radiance, but basically that's supposed to be the diffuse lighting, I think. So just looking at this, I'm guessing that's what that is, and this would be multiplied with the diffuse color, which is also known as a flat pass, and we don't have that in here. But basically, when you multiply that grayish lighting channel to the diffuse color, you would get something like this. And then moving down, we have what looks like a couple of indirect type passes, and I'll gain these up so you can actually see them. These, once again, they don't make sense as to what the naming convention is. This would suggest that it would be the indirect color, but I can tell you that that's not correct, or it sure doesn't look like it, because we don't have the indirect lighting that you would multiply to get the indirect pass. So having said that, we'll just use this here as our indirect pass. I think that'll get us pretty much exactly what we need anyway. Then you have a motion vector for doing motion blur, and a normals pass, and then we have our traditional reflection and spec pass. So with that, let's go ahead and step out, and let me just show you one thing that I wanted to illustrate with EXRs is when you have all these passes, it is a bit of a pain in the butt to step through all these layer sets. And once again, I'm going to switch this to our default gain. So when you want to see all your passes, one of the coolest things that Nuke has is something called a layer contact sheet. So if you go to layer contact sheet here, and let me break that away because that's not going to be helpful in line or in pipe. Let's see here. There we go. And now that we have added this, you can see immediately it looks at all the different layer sets that are baked into that EXR and prominently displays them in a nice laid out fashion. One other thing to note about this is that you do have this show layer names button, which is very useful. And given our screen real estate, if I zoom in, we should be able to actually see the names laid out correctly. So now you can see right away we have all the layer sets with their proper names underneath them. This is really useful, especially when you're compositing these elements together in a production world. And one thing that I have done with some facilities where their pipeline may be a little slower is I'll just render this out, just a still frame of this to have it so that way you don't have to calculate this. So that being said, let me go ahead and render our write files here so that we can start talking about integrating the CG. Okay, we now have the write nodes rendered, and they now have the alpha channel, so this sits on top of the background image the way it's supposed to. So in spite of that little diversion, we are now back on track. So let's get started on the fun stuff, which is actually controlling some of the CG to make it integrate better. One little note here, I did file in for the screen left fairy, I think yes, screen left fairy. I filed in the CG sequence files, read those in so that now you have them in the script. And also something else to note is that there's a little transform here which has been hand animated, and that's just to get the wings to stick onto the fairy itself. So with that being said, I'll leave this here. It's just basically a slap comp like we have in our demonstrated one here, just the same thing, but now you can take it from this point forward. Now, going on and looking at this, you can see right away that we have our beauty comped over, and it looks decent, but we can certainly get this to integrate a little bit better. So I'm going to show you the process of how we go about taking this beauty pass and essentially rebuilding it, so that way we have full control over all the various lighting passes to make it blend better. While we're talking about that, I'm going to go back to the contact sheet here for a second, and I'm going to do something else, which is I'm going to bring in a couple other passes that were rendered separately. And this, mind you, is something that happens often, where you'll get passes that are rendered separately. So since we have the extra screen real estate to add these 3 other passes, I'm just going to go ahead and bring them in. So what we have, and I'll kind of discuss them as we go into it more and more, but the main ones that I want to draw your attention to are the AO and the ID Mats pass. So AO stands for ambient occlusion, and basically it looks something like this. The idea with ambient occlusion is that it creates shading for the areas like creases and that sort of thing in material. So it's different from a shadow pass, but it creates shading to give the illusion of depth on material as it's being applied to geometry. That being said, let's just go ahead and copy this in. So, whoops, what we're going to do is a shuffle copy rather, not a copy. We could do it this way, but it's actually more time consuming, so I will show you with a shuffle copy. So what we're going to do, and actually the other thing that the shuffle copy does by default is it defaults to the B stream, and so you would technically add it to what you're copying into, but that's a little aside. So now that this is set up correctly, what we're going to do is take the in pipe, we're going to take the RGB, and we're going to set it to the output of a new layer, and we're going to go ahead and call this AO. So come here to new, and we'll call it AO, and you could even just take pass if you want, and then we'll just hit this RGBA, and so that way it'll just take all the channels that it sees that's necessary. And we also, for some reason, I don't know if it did this by default, but it's taking the RGB from the number 2 input, which is wrong. What we want is the number 1 input. So there. And to be honest, I think that we want to preserve the alpha from the number 1 input, so I'm going to switch this here. Then we'll add the ID mats, which is essentially the same process. So add another shuffle copy. And for this one, we will take the RGB one more time, and we'll set this to a new layer, and we'll call this ID mats. Okay, and let's see, ID mats, and set that like so, and there we go. And then the last thing here, which is a Fresnel pass, we'll just put it in just to show, but we're not going to be using it, and I'll explain why in just as we get further down in our building of the beauty. I'll explain what the Fresnel pass does and why we're not going to use it. All right, so this is going to be the Fresnel. So just all right, now we have them all set up, and if we go to the layer contact sheet one more time, now you'll see them in the contact sheet, which is actually pretty cool. So actually I'll expand on the viewer so we can actually see our layer names. So we just added the AO, the ID mats, which looking at this I can tell this is wrong, so we'll go back and fix that. And now the Fresnel. So let's go and see what happened with the ID mats. Oh, it's because the RGB is taken from pipe number 2. I thought I had switched that over, but I got a little ahead of myself, and actually, whoops, not that one. This one here, I'm just going to make sure that the alpha channel comes from the number 2 pipe. And why am I doing that with the alpha channel? And I will explain, because this is a perfect time to kind of talk about some of the layer passes. Now, of course, you can see the ID mats. So if we step through the red, green, and blue, you can see we have the ribs separated on the red and blue, and then the green is the interior portion of those semi-transparent wings. So you can see right away how that could be useful for color corrections. Now that we're here at this stage, one of the things that I wanted to address is when we look at our various passes here, one of the things that you'll notice is the alpha channel from the beauty does not carry through in these other passes. So in this case, the diffuse, the indirect lighting, the normals, and so on. So bear in mind when we are doing our separating of the passes and recreating them to create the beauty, we're going to need to pay attention to where that alpha channel is, because it's going to be useful when we have to do color corrections and that sort of thing. So with that being said, let's go ahead and look at the basic mathematical formula of the beauty pass with Mental Ray. So in Mental Ray, it's basically just the diffuse plus the indirect plus the spec plus the reflection. And with all of these added together, that should give you the beauty. And you know, if not, it's going to be something very close to it. In some cases, beauty passes may be rendered at different times and something may have changed. But that being said, that's our basic formula. So let's go ahead and get started. What we're going to do is actually something known as the out pipe method. And I will show you both the in pipe and the out pipe method. I personally like to work with the out pipe method because it gives me a very nice visual in the node graph as to what's going on. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and take a shuffle and branch this off. And if I can just grab it, okay. And we'll just move this up here. This is only going to be for viewing purposes only. So we might use these in a different context, but for the most part, we're just going to keep this off to the side. And then we're going to create our first pass, which is the diffuse. So in the shuffle here, we're going to take our diffuse, and we can take either one of these because they're the same. And we're going to move that to the RGB. Now, since the diffuse does not have an alpha channel, we're going to preserve the alpha channel from the RGBA. So we now have this. Mind you, this is just a shuffle. It's not a shuffle copy, so there's only one input. So when you see this in2, what it means is taking from another layer or layer set. And mind you, if I ever say the terms layer and layer set, they're interchangeable. So now that we've created this, I am going to label this aptly diffuse. And if we look at the output of it, and ooh, actually, that's very interesting. I am not seeing the alpha channel, probably because we're looking at the wrong layer. Okay, there's the alpha channel. And now if we turn this off, you will see that all you're seeing is the diffuse pass. So there's the beauty, and this is now the diffuse pass. Next, what we need to do is add our indirect lighting. So let's go ahead and create another shuffle node. And in this case, we'll come down here. We will take the indirect, and once again, we'll take the alpha channel from the RGBA, and we'll call this indirect. Okay. Now we have these two passes, so the next step is to add them together. So select that, and instead of an over, what we're going to do is add them. So where's plus? Here we go. So now you can see very minimal change, but this would be adding the indirect, And actually, let's just make sure that our indirect, yep, well, okay, you can see why it's very minimal, because there's very little in the way of luma going on with that. So we should see some change. Oh yeah, now you can see it in here. So that's our first step. Then the next step we want to do is let's go ahead and add our reflection. So one more time, and what I'm going to do is just copy this since we've already set up the nodes correctly. So we'll call this the reflection. I'll just abbreviate it like such. And there we have it. And this time we don't need to change any of this because we've preserved the alpha channel. And one more time, we could actually just copy this, paste, bring it here. So we're now copying the plus. And now we have the reflection, which is starting to look a lot like the beauty, except for the last piece missing is the speck. So the specular. Let's go ahead and get that one more time. We'll copy this and branch this off. Create another dot node. And if I can just grab it. Okay. And I'll name this spec. And we'll come down here to spec. Now that we have this, one last time, a plus, and we'll paste it onto here and go from here. So technically, this should be the beauty. And so if we compare it with our original beauty, there's a slight change going on. It seems to be right around the ribs. And honestly, we're getting some sort of something else coming through, which we can step through the passes now and see where that's coming from. So if we disable it's not really in the spec. And if we look at, actually one more time, yeah, it's not in the spec. Let's see if it's in it could be in the reflection. And it seems like there's a little bit of it in the reflection. And let's turn this one off. And it looks like it could be also in this indirect as well, slightly. So, yeah, actually, I think it's more in the indirect and also in the reflection. So, here, if we go back to our view of this beauty one more time and compare. So with the indirect turned off, we see it still. So it's in the reflection as well. Makes it a little harder to see, but I think it's primarily in the reflection. So let's turn this on one more time. Yeah, I feel like it's in there. So to me, what I can ascertain from all of this is that these passes may have been created after the beauty was created. So, and actually, let's just look at yeah, I think yeah, no, it's basically in the reflection and a little bit in the diffuse. So okay, so that's fine. It's not, certainly not a showstopper by any stretch. And so now that you've seen this, this is how we can now composite this over the background. So if we do this, in fact, actually, what I'm going to do is add another switch node so we can sort of see the differences between the two. Just by, and actually I'll switch the inputs. So we're starting out originally with, there we go, we're starting out with the beauty in 0 and the rebuilt beauty in 1. Now if we look at our output here, right fairy over the background, and we switch between the two, you can see almost no change whatsoever between the two as they're integrated. So that's a good sign. All right, well, with that being said, let's move on to some of the color corrections. So as a rule of thumb, generally what I like to do before I do any any major color corrections is just set the black levels of the CG. This is something, matching the blacks to the plate is something that is always done. So let's look at our plate by itself, and then we'll look at our output here. And once again, oh, you know, actually, this is also another thing that I forgot to talk about, which is if you look at the alpha channel now from our beauty and the original alpha channel, this actually is not good. It's not right. Because, whoops, excuse me. This here is our original alpha channel from the beauty as it came in, and now that we have it like so, it looks crazy. And if you start looking at the values, you can see that we go over values of 1 occasionally, or we should be. And why is that? Well, it turns out that we're adding the alpha channel values all the way down this pipe. So technically, what we want to do is actually get the original alpha and copy that into this B stream one more time so that we have the original alpha. So you may be asking, well, why did we go through this process of setting up the alpha for each of these passes when it's going to screw it up at the end? And the reason why is because if we do any sort of color corrections, namely black point adjustment, you need to be able to unpremultiply that with the alpha channel. So this is why we went through this process, but of course now we needed to take one last corrective measure to fix that. So I'm just going to take a copy node off of the original where the beauty comes in, and we'll just take this down and put this at the very end here. So there we go. Now this is correct. So if we look at this, now we have the correct alpha channel, and actually if we look at our output of it over the background, let's see, and here we can make sure that nothing changes. Yeah, nothing seems to be changing on the between the original beauty and our rebuilt beauty, so that's good. I'm surprised actually we didn't see any more defined change prior with that alpha channel being the way it was, but all good because now it's fixed. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and set our black point for the CG wings and match it to the black point of the plate. So here is our rebuilt beauty now with the proper alpha, and let's go ahead and add a grade node to it. Okay, and I'm just going to name this blacks. There we go. And we're going to, since we know that we're going to be affecting the alpha when we adjust a black point, we're going to unpremultiply by the alpha. So now that we have that, let's just go ahead and sample the black point of the, or the dark area of the CG wings. I'm just going to gain this up. I find that this is a good way to figure out where the black points are. So I would say this right here is a good spot. And now when we look at this, it will set that to black. Of course, that makes it look kind of wrong, but that's okay, because now what we're going to do is look at our background plate, and once again we'll bring this up and we'll take something from over here. So we're going to do the lift, and I think that I had already demonstrated this before, so now you see it again. All right, there we go. And it still looks a little wonky, so we may end up lifting this a little more. Oh wait, that's, yeah, no, that doesn't look quite the way I want it, but it might be okay. Let's just see how this looks in the context. Actually, let's go back here to this, and one more time, we're going to set our gain back down to 1 as a default. And let's just turn this on and off and see how that looks. Not seeing a change. Let's see here. That's interesting. Okay, it's coming through. Let's see here. And, well, we see the change there. So why are we not seeing a change when we go down here? Oh, actually, that's why we weren't seeing a change in the alpha channel. It's because of our retiming. So you know what I'm going to do is actually turn this off for the time being, so we can see the actual changes we're making to the comp, because now you can see the change. Okay, so, and actually also now if we adjust our switch node, we'll see the difference between the CG. So yeah, you can still see a change. That's the original, and that is with our rebuilt beauty. I think it looks better with our rebuilt beauty, and that's a good thing. So why don't we go ahead and add our black level adjustment now. And with that being said, I think at this point, just for safety reasons, I'm going to take the switch out. So we'll take this, branch this off here, and now we know we're not looking at the beauty, the original beauty, as it's being color corrected and so on. Okay, so now that we have this, there's one other thing that I wanted to adjust or add to our beauty, which we didn't, which we're going to add to the beauty. And so right here at this point is where we have the original beauty pass rebuilt, but now we want to add the ambient occlusion pass. So that should make a nicer look. And with all of these have all been additive functions. For an ambient occlusion, the way we handle that is by multiplying it with the beauty pass. So I'm just going to do a multiply merge here, which is the same as just going to hitting the M key and taking your this here down to multiply. And that does not look good. Let me see how this looks in context with, okay, this is the RG, this is the beauty, this is the AO. Ah, yeah, these don't line up. Actually, this could be a timing issue. Yes, it is. Okay, here we go. All right, now we should see something that looks more like we want it to. So come down here to the comp one more time, and let's look at this. And if we turn this on and off, now we're seeing that shading coming in, especially under these ribs, and that's exactly what we wanted to see. So yeah, this is good now. All right, so now that we've done that, let's go ahead and start the color grading process. The first thing that I would do here is take the rib color and make that a little less saturated, especially this green in here, because near her torso that just feels a little on the artificial side. And looking at other parts of this, I would also take this flame print on the wings and maybe change the color of that a little bit to being a little bit more yellow, or more like this background in here. Those are just the first two things that I can see that I would like to change. So let's go ahead and get started with that. So with the ribs, this green color, I think that's primarily in the diffuse pass. So if we go to the diffuse, okay, so in here you can see this green is very saturated sort of towards this core area. And the way I would do that is just go to the diffuse here and add a hue correct. Okay, so if we go ahead and plot the saturated green area, so right in here, I'm just going to go ahead and take a sampling. Now we have our the region that we want to change, which is just this area over here. So I'm going to take this and line this up with that. And yeah, something like that. Actually, let's expand this so we have a little bit more resolution on what we're adjusting here. Okay. And then I think I'll also take this over a little bit, so as we adjust these curves, it will look better. Okay, now we have this. Let's go ahead and look at the adjustments as we make it. So we'll take this saturation down, and yeah, something like this. I think that might be a little much, but that's okay. And another thing I would do actually is these feel a little bright in here as well. So, and that's seems to be primarily in that green area. So let's go ahead and copy this here. We'll take this curve and just make these points pretty much exactly the same area. And we'll take this value down, the luma value. Okay, I'd say that feels better. And we might be able to take the saturation up a little bit more because it's totally stripping the green out there. Yeah, there we go. I'm happier with that. Okay, now that we have that, let's just see the before and after. Yeah, honestly, that looks much better to me. All right. Now the next thing that I want to do is, if we look at our diffuse pass one more time, is take this free kind of fiery or flame like pattern that's on the wings. Let's just color correct that so that feels a little bit better. And I'm going to do one thing here. We had copied this ID mat into this stream here so we could see it in the layer sets, but to be honest, it makes a lot of sense for us to just keep that in pipe. So we will take this here. So now we have that ID mat section in our color correction pipe. The reason why we're going to do that is because if we look at our ID mats, actually let's just look at the postage stamp. We want the green section because that's the area for which that flame print is coming through. So now if we change that, we can just add a grade here. And let's go back and look at this. And if we take the ID, what was it, green, I think? ID mat green here as our mask input. Now we can change the color of that. So let's go back to our composite and just see what happens when we start to adjust that. So we'll take the gain and let's just go ahead and take the saturation curve. And obviously this is way too much, but now we can adjust this. I think we wanted to make it more yellow. Yeah, something more like this feels better. And we'll take the value down a little bit too. All right. Next, let's see here. Let's just grade the alpha. So we're just going to take this here and let's see if we take our gamma up and our gain down, it'll make it feel, it should blend a little bit better. Okay. Yeah, that, I actually like this more. This feels a lot better. Okay. Now that we've done that, let's see what else can we do to, I think actually that really satisfies a lot to me in terms of how the ribs came through. They were feeling just a little too dark. Now, admittedly, another way we could do this, which is probably even better, let's move all this down or all this up rather. And let's take another grade node and we'll adjust the ribs on the diffuse pass here one more time. Let's go back here. Yeah, these ribs in here. And let's just see. Let me gain this up for a second. Actually, yeah, we could do both of these in conjunction with one another. So here, let's take this grade node and put it below here. So we're actually going to adjust the two passes together. And what I'm also going to do is grab this node here. What we want is the red and the blue to get the ribs. So easiest way I can think of do this is just an expression node. So we'll just do an expression off of here. And we'll just kind of tie this in like so. So what we want is we're going to take the alpha here and we're going to take the sum of the red and the blue. And let's just check it to make sure that's right. Yep, that's exactly what we want. Okay. And let me just move this down. So now we have a mat for controlling those ribs. And one more time, let's frame up, go to the comp and see what we got here. All right, so let's gain these up slightly. And another thing that I'm seeing is this outside edge here, and I'm guessing that's a result of our AO pass being multiplied in. So let's look at this one more time. Yes, it is. That's exactly what it is. I'll leave that in for the time being. Of course, we could always adjust. Yeah, you know what? That being said, I think we might want to adjust the AO pass. So that's one nice thing about this is you can take the slider for the multiply and just do a slight multiplication of the AO in there, and that actually feels better too. So okay, now that we have this, I would say that the next step is to, I think that the next thing that I'd like to do is just adjust the reflection. So let's add a grade onto the reflection pass. And let's see here. I'm thinking of just taking this also to kind of that greenish color. And, you know, here, let's do this. Let's just sample this in here. But let's have the eyedropper selected. There we go. And I'm going to pull this value up a little bit. Maybe take this a little more to the green. Take the saturation down. And then also let's take our multiply, which basically is exactly the same as the gain, but now we're just operating them on two different channels here. Yeah, actually, you know what? Let's take this down and gamma this up so we have a nice soft, the reflection is going to be just a nice soft uniform lighting. I would say that this looks better. Yeah, no, this looks much better. Okay. Now that we've done that, let's just go ahead and one more time, let's compare our original beauty with the color corrected passes that we've done. So let's go here. So that's the original beauty in 0, and this is where we've taken it. So already I can say that this feels a lot more integrated with the background. And one other thing we could do is actually turn our transform back on, because I moved all of that, or I had turned all of these off, but this transform actually placed the fairy and her wings in a different place. And one more time, let's look at this. I would say that this is exactly where I would like to take this at this point. So with that being said, why don't you have a go at doing the wings for the left fairy, who's down here. Like if we look at the downstream pipe here, at the end here. So we have this fairy, and you know, already you have your beauty tied in. So go ahead and adjust these to your preferences, and you know, if you want, take this one step further if you'd like to. There's no reason why you have to take what I've done, because the beauty of this part is this is actually kind of the more artistic end of doing compositing work. So you can take it any direction you want. Ultimately, the job is to make the supervisor or client happy, and that's always a review process, and you know, step by step. So I would say that this is where I want to take this. One last thing that I wanted to demonstrate before I close here is the end pipe method of combining the beauty. So let's take a look at that. And lastly, before I show you the end pipe method, one of the things I did not mention up until this point, since we've essentially completed what I wanted to show for this exercise, was the Fresnel pass. And that's this one right here. And essentially what this controls the reflectivity of the reflection pass. So it's basically like a lighting pass or a lighting contribution for the reflection of the reflection pass. So the areas that are more illuminated are those that are facing away from the camera, and that which is more dark is actually what's facing towards the camera. So that's really all this is. But since we had this in our passes, I just wanted to at least address it and talk a little bit about it. With that being said, let's move on to creating the in-pipe method. To get started, what we'll do is we'll just create a postage stamp off of our EXR pipeline right now. So let's just add a postage stamp, and we'll branch this off. Now, to do this, what we want to do, the first mathematical operation that we wanted to do was the addition of the indirect lighting with the diffuse. So we can do this a couple of ways. I'll just hit the M key to create a merge node. And from here, let's look at this. Okay. Now from here, what we'll do is set this to plus, because of course it's in the additive function. And then we're going to do something you've probably never done before, which is connect the B input up to the source. And here, what we're going to do is change our channels. So our B would be the diffuse, and then our A, we're going to add our A to the diffuse, and that would be the indirect. So here we go. And this probably looks quite familiar. So once again, now that we've done that, we now have that set. Also, if we look at the alpha channel, if I turn this off, we'll get our alpha channel and be able to preserve that. So this has a nice clean look, and you know, if we want to continue down the road, the next would be adding the reflection to this. So let's just go ahead. We could actually just do a plus. So same operation, which is basically a merge node, and then connect the two pipes up together. And one more time, we're going to take our A, now it's going to be the reflection, and we're going to add it to our B stream, which is now going to stay as RGBA. And so now, if our alpha channel is still preserved nicely, which is cool, and now if you look at the difference, we actually have pretty much everything we had before with the reflection. And then lastly, of course, as you have probably figured out by now, we would do the same operation where we take the spec. We want to do the spec on the A side. We'll add that to the RGBA. So now, when you look at this and we compare against our beauty, it's exactly the same situation we had before with that little difference going on. And then if you were to do color corrections now, it would be slightly different. So as you probably realized, everything up until this merge node is the beauty. As soon as we get to this merge node, now it becomes the addition of the diffuse and the indirect. So with that, how would you actually go about color correcting it? Well, here's how. Essentially, just remember that our A side, we're going to call this the indirect, right? So if we wanted to color correct the diffuse, we can tell you what, we'll just grab this hue correct node since we've already done this. If we want to do that, we would have to add this here. But of course, if you remember, it's not going to make any change because this is just beauty beforehand. And so if I turn it on and turn it off, you notice right away that nothing's happening. So the only way you can do that is by going up here and now changing this to the diffuse. Of course, once you do that, then it comes through. So like I was saying before, this is a system that I don't usually use because for me, I just like to be able to see it like this. And frankly, this just feels simpler to me than having to remember all the little nuances for this. But you know, work however you want, how you feel comfortable. Some people really like a clean script like this, which is great. So that being said, that's essentially what I wanted to show off this class, and I look forward to any comments you have on the forums, and have fun. Most of all, have fun with this stuff. Next week we'll get into some other stuff. You probably noticed there's motion vector passes and that sort of thing. So we're going to address that, and we're going to continue with this comp. So I hope you guys are having fun with it, and like I said, enjoy. I'll see you next week. All right, have a great day.